I never thought a single cruel laugh could shatter the life I had built so carefully over 10 years. But that night in Italy, when Gabriel slammed the car door and drove away with his friends, leaving me standing frozen on a cobblestone street I couldn't even pronounce the name of, I realized the cracks in our marriage had finally split wide open. His friends laughed as the taillights disappeared, their voices fading into the night air like a cruel echo of everything I had ignored for years. I stood there, mouth open in mid-sentence, realizing no apology, no excuse could ever erase this moment. I whispered to myself, "He's coming back. He has to." But the knot in my stomach grew tighter as minutes turned to an hour, as the locals at the cafe tables glanced at me with uneasy curiosity, as the evening sky darkened and the street lamps cast long, unfamiliar shadows. I had $80 in my purse, my passport, my phone, and that was all. My credit cards, my only real access to safety, were in his wallet. He had offered to carry them earlier when I complained my purse was too full. Now I saw it for what it was: not kindness but control. The first night I found a dingy room above a bakery, its air heavy with the smell of yeast and smoke. The old woman who led me upstairs didn't speak English, but she understood enough to pat my arm, her eyes full of pity. I curled up on the narrow bedphone in hand and tried again and again to reach Gabriel. 27 calls, all sent to voicemail, my texts delivered but unanswered. His friends Pete, Marco, every one of them blocked me too. That was when the horror of it settled in. This wasn't drunken recklessness. This was deliberate, calculated, a humiliation they all shared in together. I barely slept that night. I told myself in the morning he would come back. He would apologize, blame me for overreacting, and I would be so relieved I'd swallow it. That was how our marriage had always worked. I'd bend, I'd plaster over the cracks pretending nothing was broken. But the morning light brought no car, no message, just the church bells ringing out into the air of a town that had already moved on. By the second day, I was rationing coins, a single panini for lunch, walking the narrow streets, scanning every cafe and hotel, praying I'd spot him, praying this nightmare would collapse into something I could survive with a shred of dignity. But instead I realized their group had simply gone on without me. To Florence, to Rome, to whatever came next, without a backward glance. On the third day, a cafe owner pressed a free espresso into my trembling hands and pointed me to the police. The officer was sympathetic, but his English was broken, my Italian non-existent. He took my report with a shrug, as if abandoned tourists were nothing unusual. When I left, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. That afternoon, I walked into a pawn shop with my wedding ring, a 2-carat diamond Gabriel had upgraded for our 5th anniversary. I twisted it off my fingers, trembling, remembering the night he'd slipped it onto my hand the way I had believed it meant forever. The pawnbroker barely glanced at it before sliding euros across the counter. Far less than it was worth, but enough to keep me alive another few days. I thought about calling my father. One call and I'd be home in Boston by the week's end, but that also meant hearing my mother's "I told you so." It meant facing the truth my friends had whispered for years, the truth I'd ignored, that Gabriel was cruel, controlling, and I had been shrinking myself smaller and smaller just to keep the illusion alive. So instead I boarded a bus. The electronic board lit up names of cities I had only read about in travel magazines. Rome, Naples, Athens. My finger hovered over my father's number and my contacts, trembling, then fell away. I couldn't go back. Not yet. By the time I stumbled into a small coastal village in Greece, 14 hours later, my body was raw with exhaustion. My sandals cut into my blistered feet, my stomach hollowed with hunger. I felt like a ghost of myself wandering streets whose language I didn't understand. But as the sun set over the Aegean, painting the water gold and pink, a strange peace slipped over me. Gabriel had abandoned me to teach me a lesson, to prove I was nothing without him. Instead, he had set me free. That night, my body gave out on a dusty path among olive groves. My knees buckled and I fell face first into the dirt, too weak to rise. For a moment, I thought maybe this was how it ended, abandoned in one country, collapsing in another, forgotten. But then I heard a woman's voice cutting through the darkness, felt hands lifting me, smelled the clean salt air mixed with herbs and wood smoke. Her name was Elena. She and her husband Nikos carried me into their farmhouse, sat me at their table, fed me soup and bread, as if I were a daughter who had finally come home. I couldn't explain everything, not in words they would understand, but when Elena pressed her hand over mine, I realized I didn't need to. And that was the night my story stopped being about Gabriel and started being about me. Elena and Nikos gave me a small room in their farmhouse. The bed was rough, but clean, the window opening to the sound of goats bleating in the distance. For the first time in days, I slept without waking in panic. I dreamed of my childhood bedroom, of my father reading bedtime stories, of a world where I had once felt safe. When I woke, the ache in my chest was sharp, but so was a new clarity. Over breakfast, Elena handed me a bowl of yogurt with honey, her warm eyes watching closely as if measuring how much of me was still broken. "Boston," she said carefully, pointing to my chest. I nodded, tears threatening. I wanted to say so much that I didn't know if Boston was home anymore, that the man who was supposed to be my home had abandoned me. But all I managed was yes. Boston. She squeezed my hand and nodded. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Over the next few days, I helped Elena with simple chores, hanging laundry in the sunlight, feeding chickens, sweeping the stone courtyard. My hands blistered, my arms ached, but the rhythm of their life was strangely soothing. They didn't ask for explanations I couldn't give. They simply offered space, and in that space I began to breathe again. Still, when I lay awake at night, Gabriel's voice haunted me. His laughter with his friends, the cruel slam of the car door. I replayed every moment of our marriage, every little control he had claimed disguised as love. The way he'd suggest I stop wearing certain dresses because they drew the wrong kind of attention. The way he insisted on holding our joint bank account passwords so nothing got complicated. The way he'd laugh at my ideas in front of his friends, then tell me I was too sensitive when I bristled. It hadn't happened all at once. It had been slow, like a drip of water hollowing stone. And now, finally, he had stripped me down to nothing. Except I wasn't nothing. I was still here. And for the first time, I had no one's voice in my ear but my own. On the fourth day, I scraped together courage and walked to the village post office. They had two old computers, their keyboards sticky with age. My hands shook as I logged into my email, half expecting Gabriel to have changed the password. But it opened. The inbox flooded with messages from friends. "Where are you? Are you okay? We saw his Instagram. Why aren't you with them?" And then buried deeper, one email from my sister, subject line in all caps, "Call me now." I clicked and my heart lurched. She had seen photos online. Gabriel in Rome, Gabriel in Florence, always with Hannah, the coworker he'd sworn was just a friend. In one, they were holding hands on the Spanish steps. In another, she wore my sunglasses. My sunglasses. My vision blurred, rage crashing over me. He hadn't just abandoned me. He had replaced me before I had even realized I was disposable. That night, I sat in the farmhouse kitchen with Nikos. He poured us each a glass of red wine and spoke softly in halting English. "Sometimes, family is not blood. Sometimes, family is who stays." His words hit me harder than anything Gabriel had ever said, because Gabriel hadn't stayed, not in Italy, not in Boston, not in our marriage. He had left me long before he drove away that night. The next morning, I made a decision. I pawned the small gold bracelet my mother had given me as a graduation gift. It broke me to let it go, but I needed enough money for a ferry to Athens. Elena pressed bread and cheese into my hands, her eyes wet with unspoken worry. In Athens, I found a small hostel. Cramped bunks, graffiti on the walls, the smell of sweat and youth. I was the oldest woman in the room, surrounded by travelers with backpacks and wide eyes. But for the first time, I didn't care. I was anonymous, free. I spent hours walking the streets, staring at ruins that had survived centuries of war and fire. If marble could endure, so could I. One evening, I wandered into an internet cafe. On impulse, I typed Gabriel's name into Facebook. The first post that popped up was his friend Marco's, a photo of Gabriel and Hannah clinking glasses captioned, "Best trip of our lives." The comments were full of heart emojis, jokes, congratulations. No one knew or cared that I had been left behind. But buried beneath, I saw one comment from a college friend of mine. "Where's Jade?" No one answered. I logged out, my hands trembling, and for the first time since he abandoned me, I smiled, because I knew then I wasn't going to call my father in defeat. I wasn't going to beg Gabriel for explanations. I wasn't going to return to Boston as the woman they expected, broken and ashamed. I was going to rebuild, piece by piece, and when I was ready, I would return not to him but to myself. The hostel in Athens became my first real classroom in survival. By day, I searched for odd jobs, cleaning, helping at cafes, translating menus for tourists who spoke English. By night, I lay in my bunk and listened to the laughter of strangers echoing through the halls. I envied their lightness, their freedom, but slowly I began to borrow pieces of it. I met a girl named Sophia, a backpacker from Spain, who invited me to join her and her friends for a day trip to the islands. At first, I almost said no. Shame clung to me like a second skin. But then I thought of Gabriel's laugh, of Hannah wearing my sunglasses, and I forced myself to say yes. On the ferry, the sea stretched endlessly, dazzling under the sun. I sat cross-legged on the deck, the salty wind whipping my hair, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something stir inside me. Not joy exactly, but the faint spark of a self I had almost forgotten. When Sophia snapped a picture of us, her arm slung around my shoulder, I didn't flinch. I smiled. And in that photo, I saw a woman who wasn't just broken, she was beginning to rise. Still, nights were the hardest. I couldn't escape the memories of Gabriel. I'd wake in a sweat, hearing his voice in my head, "You're nothing without me." It was what he'd always implied, even when he didn't say the words out loud. But every morning I rose, every euro I earned, every meal I bought for myself, chipped away at that lie. After 2 weeks, I had enough savings to book a cheap train ticket north. Not back to Italy, not yet, but to Vienna, where an old college acquaintance, Lydia, lived. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since my wedding, but desperation outweighed pride. I sent a message on social media explaining more than I had to. To my surprise, she replied within hours. "Come, stay as long as you need." Vienna was a different world. Clean streets, classical music spilling from open windows, bakeries with glass cases of perfect pastries. Lydia welcomed me into her apartment without hesitation. Over wine, she confessed she'd always disliked Gabriel. Too smooth, she said, her German accent soft but firm. Men like that, they build cages and call them castles. Her words struck me deep. I thought of our Boston apartment, how Gabriel had insisted on decorating everything, choosing the furniture, the colors, the curtains. He'd laughed at my attempts to hang my art, calling it student work. I had let him strip my voice from even the walls around me. And I had called it love. With Lydia's help, I found part-time work at a gallery, nothing glamorous, just checking coats and handing out brochures. But being surrounded by art reminded me of the girl I had once been, the one who sketched for hours in college, dreaming of a life filled with color and creation. That girl wasn't gone. She was buried, but not gone. One night after a long shift, Lydia and I sat on her balcony overlooking the city. She scrolled through her phone, then handed it to me. "You should see this," she said. It was Gabriel's Instagram. My breath caught as I saw him and Hannah again, this time in Paris, posing at the Eiffel Tower. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose something to gain everything." The comments gushed. Heart emojis, inside jokes, admiration. But all I saw was the smug tilt of his smile, the triumph in his eyes. He believed he had won, that I was nothing more than a mistake he had discarded. I handed the phone back, my hands trembling. "He thinks I'm gone, forgotten." Lydia's gaze was steady. "Then don't prove him right." Her words echoed in me for days. I realized I had a choice. I could disappear quietly, build a new life in Europe, never face him again. Or I could return. Not to beg, not to fight for scraps of love, but to confront him. To show him the woman he had underestimated. The decision crystallized on a rainy night in December. I stood in the gallery alone, staring at a painting of a woman with a torn red dress, her eyes fierce despite the ruins behind her. Something inside me clicked. I booked my flight back to Boston. When the plane touched down, snow blanketed the city. I walked through Logan Airport with nothing but a carry-on, my heart pounding as if I were marching into battle. I had no home, our apartment was in his name. No savings beyond what I had scraped together. But I had something he didn't. Truth. At my sister's house, I finally collapsed into her arms. She wept as she listened, her anger simmering hotter than my own. He's been parading Hannah around Boston like a trophy, she said bitterly. As if you never existed. Her words burned, but they also solidified my resolve. Gabriel wanted me erased, a ghost. Instead, I would stand in the light. Over the next week, I gathered everything I could. Emails, messages, screenshots of his posts with Hannah. My sister's friend, a lawyer, helped me file for divorce. You've got grounds for abandonment and emotional cruelty, she said firmly. This isn't just a breakup. This is a case. When the papers were served, Gabriel called me for the first time since Italy. His voice dripped with arrogance. Really, Jade, divorce? After everything I gave you, I almost laughed. Everything he gave me. He had left me with nothing, and somehow from nothing I had built more strength than I had ever known. I didn't argue. I simply said I'm done and hung up. But I knew it wasn't over. Not until I looked him in the eyes one last time. The day of our first court hearing dawned cold and gray, the kind of morning where the sky seemed to hold its breath. I sat on the courthouse steps with my sister clutching a thermos of coffee that had already gone lukewarm in my hands. My stomach twisted with equal parts dread and anticipation. For weeks, Gabriel's voice had haunted me, only through phone calls and distant whispers. But today I would see him again face to face. When he arrived, he didn't come alone. Hannah was at his side, her blonde hair sleek, her coat expensive. She clung to his arm like she had earned her place, as though I were the intruder in a life that had once been mine. Gabriel's smirk was faint but deliberate, a reminder of the man who had once convinced me I was lucky to have him. But as he walked past, I saw something I hadn't before, a flicker of nerves beneath his arrogance. He wasn't invincible. He was playing a part just as he always had. Inside the courtroom, the judge looked weary, as if he had heard every flavor of betrayal before. My lawyer spoke first, laying out the evidence: abandonment in a foreign country, emotional cruelty, financial control. Screenshots of his social media filled the courtroom screens, photos of him and Hannah sipping champagne while I filed a missing persons report in Italy. Gasps echoed from the gallery, whispers rippling like waves. Gabriel shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering. When it was his turn, he leaned forward, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, my wife is exaggerating. She insisted on staying behind in Italy. She said she needed space. This divorce. It's her way of punishing me for moving on. I could almost laugh at the audacity. But then I thought of the woman I had been months ago. The one who might have doubted herself, who might have believed his version of events. Not anymore. When my lawyer asked if I wanted to speak, I rose. My knees trembled, but my voice, to my own surprise, was steady. He left me. Not with money. Not with a way home. Not with respect. He left me to teach me that I was nothing without him. I swallowed hard, my eyes burning. But he was wrong. I am something. And I will never let him or anyone erase me again. The silence in the room was heavy, the kind that stretches long after words are spoken. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the table so hard his knuckles whitened. The judge cleared his throat. The evidence is overwhelming. Divorce granted, assets to be divided as proposed. Mr. Moore, your behavior constitutes abandonment and willful neglect. You are lucky criminal charges are not being pursued. The gavel fell sharp as thunder. Just like that, it was done. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. My story had spread: an American woman abandoned overseas by her wealthy husband. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions. For a moment, I wanted to shrink back, to let shame swallow me. But then I remembered Victor's words from Greece: family is who stays. And I thought of Lydia's balcony, of Sophia's smile, of Elena pressing bread into my hands. Strangers had stayed when he had not. So I lifted my chin, faced the cameras, and said, only I survived. Then I walked past Gabriel for the last time. But it wasn't the last time I saw him. A week later, he showed up at my sister's house. He looked different, tired. Hollow, his arrogance cracked. Hannah wasn't with him. His voice shook when he begged Jade, please, let's talk. 10 years, we can't just throw that away. I stood in the doorway, the winter wind cutting between us. "You threw it away on a cobblestone street in Italy," I said, "and you didn't even look back." His eyes glistened, but whether it was guilt or pride wounded, I didn't care. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't. You lost the right to touch me the night you drove away." The door clicked shut between us, and I leaned against it, my chest heaving. Not from sorrow this time, but from relief. That night, I sat at my sister's kitchen table with a cup of tea, scrolling through photos on my phone. The last image I had taken in Greece came up me on a ferry, hair wild in the wind, eyes tired but alive. I stared at it for a long time, realizing it was the truest version of me I had seen in years. And I knew then the worst thing Gabriel had ever done wasn't leaving me. It was convincing me for so long that I wasn't enough. But now I was finally free. The weeks after the divorce blurred into winter storms and quiet mornings. Boston streets glistened with salt and ice, the city lights glowing against the snow. For the first time in years, I walked them without rushing home to Gabriel, without checking my phone for his approval. At first, the silence felt foreign, like I'd misplaced a piece of myself. But slowly, I realized it wasn't silence, it was freedom. I rented a small studio apartment above a bookstore. The walls were bare, the floors creaked, and the radiator clanked like it was on its last breath. But it was mine. Every nail I hammered, every canvas I hung, every shelf I filled with secondhand treasures, it all belonged to me. When I painted again, my hands trembled, but the colors poured out of me like a dam finally breaking. Blues for sorrow, reds for rage, gold for the fragile hope I'd carried across countries. Sometimes I'd catch myself remembering Italy, the cobblestones, the laughter fading as the car sped away, the way my heart shattered in real time. The wound was still raw, a scar not yet fully formed. But then I'd remember Greece, Elena's hand over mine, Nikos, saying family is who stays. Those memories healed me as much as the others had broken me. One evening, my sister came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. She sprawled on my couch, looking around at the half-finished paintings. "You seem lighter," she said, her eyes soft. I smiled faintly. "I guess I am." "You don't miss him?" she asked. I thought about it, really thought. I missed the idea of him, the life I thought we had. But the man, no. Because he never existed the way I believed. She nodded, tears brimming. "I'm proud of you." That night, after she left, I sat by the window with my tea, staring at the city below. For years, I had measured my worth by Gabriel's moods, his approval, his promises. Now I measured it by the small victories, paying my own rent, painting into the early hours, laughing with my sister over greasy noodles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And it was mine. Months later, I learned through friends that Hannah had left him. Rumors said she'd found someone younger, someone less complicated. Gabriel had been seen drinking alone at the same bar where he used to hold court with his friends. The thought didn't fill me with satisfaction, the way I once imagined. It just made me sad, not for him, but for the years I had wasted, believing he was more than he was. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about watching him fall. It was about rising from what he tried to bury me under. And I had risen. Spring came, and with it, new beginnings. I submitted my first painting to a local gallery's group exhibition. When they accepted, I stood in front of my canvas on opening night, surrounded by strangers admiring the work born from my pain. A woman asked me what it meant, and for once, I didn't stumble. "It's about survival," I said. "About finding yourself after someone tries to erase you." Her eyes glistened as she nodded. "I feel that." As I left the gallery that night, I walked past couples holding hands, friends laughing on sidewalks, families gathered at restaurant windows. For the first time, I didn't feel envy. I felt possibility. Because I knew now that love, when it came again, would never look like control or cruelty. It would look like Elena's soup, Lydia's balcony, Sophia's laughter on the ferry. It would look like people who stayed. And maybe someday it would look like the woman in the mirror finally loving herself enough to never settle for less again. So this is my story. The story of the night I was left behind, and the months that followed when I thought I was broken beyond repair. But I wasn't. I was remade. Stronger, braver, truer than the girl who boarded a plane to Italy thinking her marriage was forever. If you've ever felt abandoned, if you've ever believed you were nothing without someone else, let me tell you, you are more than enough. You can rise, you can build again, and you will find the people, the family who stay. If my journey touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment about the moment that spoke to your heart the most. Your voice matters, and you never know who else your words might save.